Today we're answering the question, what actually makes us a purpose-driven church? Purpose-driven is not a denomination. It's not an affiliation. It's a way of thinking about obedience. It's a way of health to make sure that there is balance between the five purposes that God has called us to live for, has called the church to live for. We get that in the Great Commission and the Great Commandment: worship, fellowship, ministry, evangelism, and discipleship. Once we have understood what God has called us to do, the five purposes, then we begin to think about how do we make our church a purpose-driven church? What makes our church a purpose-driven church? How do you know my church is a purpose-driven church? That's the question I want to answer this morning. And while we're doing that, there's a lot more to say about this, and I hope that in smaller videos I'll keep coming back to you, and you can send me questions, you can send me thoughts that you have on it, and then we can take that forward. Getting started right away, the first 4 P's that come to my mind are these: prioritize, preach, program, and educate. Well, it's not P, but prioritize, preach, program, and educate. The first and foremost thing that makes you a purpose-driven pastor, that makes your church a purpose-driven church, is that you prioritize purposes over everything else. The purposes of God more than people, the purpose of God more than programs, the purposes of God more than personality, more than finances, more than anything else, even property. The purposes of God come first. When you begin to think about the purposes of God, does this program meet God's purpose? Does this personality meet God's purpose? Is this the way we're doing things in church according to God's purposes? When we begin to think about the purposes of God, we're beginning to think as a purpose-driven church. The next P we look at is preach, where you systematically organize your preaching around purposes. That means through January, through February, through March, you have a plan where whatever you're preaching and teaching is organized around the purposes, so you ensure that there is a balanced diet right through the year on covering all 5 purposes. Some pastors love worship, some pastors talk about discipleship, some pastors are big on ministry. Everything's important, equally important. So what God wants is for us to cover and give the whole counsel of God to the people of God in teaching through the purposes. You could do a 4-week series of anything that highlights the worship, living on worship, living as a sacrifice before God. You could spend another 4 weeks on talking about discipleship. What I do is I systematically go through all 5 purposes, then take a break for a month, and then go through all 5 purposes again. That makes sure for me that I have covered all the 5 purposes in a year. So that's how I organize my preaching around the purposes. And even when you're planning your preaching, you could be checking, what purpose does this meet? And even tell your people, today we're talking about so-and-so, we're talking about Joshua chapter 6, and we're talking about Matthew chapter 3. In this, we're going to highlight how we can be obedient to evangelism or be obedient to discipleship. So that's how you kind of make it clear about what purpose you're meeting. And the last one I want to just touch on today is education. When you have a specific process in your church, where you are taking a person through all the 5 purposes and you're teaching them, what is worship? How do I do it? What is discipleship? How do I do it? What is evangelism? How do I do it? And you are educating people from purpose to purpose. And you've accomplished all 5, and you push them through a process where you make sure they learn all the 5 purposes, not just about it, but how to implement it. That's when you are beginning to become a purpose-driven church. So let's go through that again. Number 1 is when you prioritize purposes above property, above personalities, above programs. The second one is when you preach on purpose, when you cover all the 5 purposes in your preaching. The third one is when you program on purpose, when you make sure every program is aligned to a particular purpose. And the last one is when you educate every member, take that person step by step through a process. You can choose the process, the speed of the process, but take that person through a process where every member in your church is being educated on the purposes of God. Not just educated on purpose, but educated about the purposes of God. This is where you begin to head in the direction of becoming healthy. This is what would then call you a purpose-driven church. This is when people would say, that is a purpose-driven church. So that's why I just want to clear that up with you. And if you have any more questions, just comment in the section below, or write to me, and I'd love to get back to you on that. I'm here to serve you, and anything we can do to help you make your church a healthy church and make you a healthy pastor.